Hi, this is Ron Visconti, the Executive Director of Phase 2 Careers, and I'm here with Randy Block, Executive and Career Coach. And the topic today is the why in ageism. Um, Randy, we've got a lot of things to cover here. It seems to me ageism starts with stereotypes. Do you want to tell us some stereotypes that come to mind that always crop up?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It seems like our I may have mentioned this to you before, but our whole lives have been filled with stereotypes. Okay, and I think what brought this to light, I was in a drugstore buying a birthday card for a friend, and I noticed that there were no cards for gender or for race, et cetera. All those things that make up diversity, but there were lots of cards and humorous cards about getting older. And so I think this is just one small example of uh, uh, the there is a stigma attached to growing older, and they're too old to do this, they're too old to understand, they're too old to adapt, and this has been bred in us forever. I know my dad, you know, uh, dyed his hair with Grecian formula, whatever the number was, and because it was not good to have gray hair, because gray hair meant old, out to pasture. So it's not like it's new. This has been with us forever. So yeah, that there's an assumption made a lot about whether a person, we won't go through hiring this person, et cetera, by virtue of the fact that they are old. They're heading towards the last roundup, and this is simply has to be broken, Ron.
And I agree, and I see and hear a lot of SHRM, the human resources surveys, and they always talk about flexibility and energy and
Yeah.
resistant to change. And then we have that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So it's very ingrained in us. Well, when we talk about stereotypes, we also have to talk about employers. Don't they have misperceptions or perceptions about medical and
Yeah.
costliness? Do you want to
They
comment
they
on
do,
that?
and I think in defense of that side of the equation, it is expensive. Now that COVID hit, that a certain age, over a certain age, like 60 or 65, whatever, you become much more of a vulnerable to it, something like COVID. Secondly, to insure somebody medically from ages say 55 even to age 65 before Medicare kicks in, it's expensive. So it's not like this is an easy task for an employer, certainly. And but beyond that, employers sometimes will think, well, I've got all this experience. This is the candidate, that is. I've got all this experience, and I should be paid a lot more, or I should have the corner office. I think this is on the other side of the equation. With the boomers insisting that they can do this, and then the third thing is, of course, that employers want their employees to have good work experience, and for an older worker to come in and say, I can do this with one hand tied behind me, and I could do it, almost blindfolded. Uh, the employer is going to ask, well, that's not a good employment experience.
So
So
there's
I'm sorry. Yeah,
several parts to this. It's
yeah,
just
that's what
not
I'm saying.
one
Yeah,
way. I hear from the applicant side
yeah,
constantly when they go to an interview, they're told they're overqualified. What
right.
does that mean to you? And what are your thoughts?
Well, overqualified again means that there is that they would find the job too easy, that they would intimidate their fellow workers, perhaps their peers. They would even intimidate the hiring manager because they know more about what they're doing. And on the one hand, you say, well, that's pretty straightforward. But on the other hand, try being someone who is managing someone who knows not only your job, but maybe your boss's job, okay? And could do it faster, better, and quicker. And again, on the surface, you might say, hey, this is no big deal. But it is a big deal, mainly because a lot of older workers need to be led. need leadership. They don't need to be managed. And right or wrong, good or bad, I think Gen Xers now are getting more into leadership positions, and millennials are striving for that. But they're still managers, and there's that friction also. That I'm, you're the boss of me. Come on, I could be your grandfather, I could be your dad, and of course, and there's some stigma to that too. I remember giving talks on this before live, and I'd say, would anybody really have hired their mother or father when they were 35? And there always seemed to be one person in the back of the audience who would, I would, and I'd say, yeah, sure you would. Sit down.
So you bring up the issue of overqualified.
Yeah.
What's cropping up in diversity? There's the diversity and inclusion and equity. How come age is being dropped out? I hear a lot of companies not reporting age.
Because I think it's silent. Okay, it's a silent way to discriminate. Again, all employers have to do in any situation is merely tell the candidate that they're not going to hire. It's not a good fit. That's all they've got to say legally, and they can hide behind that. And I think it's much tougher now, certainly with ethnic and with racial and gender, etc. It's much more visible and easier to prove. But with age discrimination, I think that age discrimination needs to be a key component of any diversity program. You and I both talked about this, and there's such a wealth of experience and judgment, wisdom, and all that sort of thing that can be drawn upon that will add to your problem solving, and a diverse work group certainly, in my view, certainly makes a big difference in the world in terms of solving problems. You get all these different points of view where you can make good decisions, as opposed to coming from one, from one. Well, I hate to say this, but a bunch of white guys, who are about the same age,
Well, I agree. And the ADEA, which was set up in the late 60s to put in age, a lot of that has gone away. I wanted to bring up a different topic, the topic of a career pyramid. Mm-hmm. You want to comment on that?
Well, basically what we say is that the higher you go up the ladder, the corporate ladder, the less opportunity there is. That's always been the case. Okay. And I think as we look at the corporate ladder, I always say the IBM corporate ladder, that this essentially is going away. With the building of, with Matrix, it's no longer command and control. It's much more, people can have dotted lines to everywhere. So I think what people, it's the employees' responsibility and to make sure that they are getting what they need to develop and grow. Okay. What happens, what I've observed with older workers, is they more or less plateau at a certain level. It could be middle management, could be senior, an individual contributor, could even be at the C level, and they start to coast. They start to say, I'm doing my job, I'm the master of it, and I'm just not going to learn anything more. I'm no longer going to position myself. Well, when it comes time for reorganizing, downsizing, etc., the people that have plateaued typically are the ones that are usually looked at to eliminate. They just have stayed in that one role so long that they haven't bothered to stay current and to stay current in terms of economic conditions, industry trends, and all of that. So yeah, the higher you go up, the less opportunity there is. And there are just so many, for example, there's just so many C-suite positions to go around. That was true before COVID. That was true. That's been true since day one, since the Industrial Revolution. Just so many people that can run the show.
So how about the issue? It's hard to prove age discrimination. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, Ron, it's interesting. I really believe this, and I read somewhere where a manager would literally have to say to you, the candidate, I'm not going to hire you because you're too old, and I want to go with somebody younger who I can pay less and work the heck out of them, and et cetera. And you would have to have your phone. I don't have my phone here. You have to have your phone recording that conversation. I think you might have a case there, but I think what if there was a manager out there that would be willing to be recorded saying that is pretty slim. The chances are pretty slim. So yeah, no, I think it's almost impossible to prove in the hiring process. Yeah.
And they take a long time to resolve. That's another thing too.
I've just not heard. I've heard of, it's more, quite frankly, Ron, it's more one-offs. That, hey, every now and then I read about every couple of years. I don't know that for a fact, but it just seems I seldom read about where someone wins in a case like that. Age discrimination is much more easy to defend legally when there is a resizing, and son of a gun, everybody that got laid off was ages 50 and over. And I've read about class action suits like that. Sure, matter of fact, there's been several that have been successful. But this one-on-one, he said, she said, no, it's too hard.
What about the issue of technology? We live in Silicon Valley area, and technology's king. And if you're not up to date on the latest and greatest, you're thought as not being part of the system. What's your comment about that?
Well, it goes back to it goes back to the individual who doesn't stay up on it, doesn't stay up on the technology. After all, we were in our generation, we were the first to use Word, and all the updates since then. So we've all been adapting. What I have my clients do, just as an example, which is of any age, is that they are very up on knowing in their own profession or in their own field, such as finance, such as marketing, etc. They know how AI/machine learning can be a tool for them. That's one way for them to stay up on it. They can talk the talk there. Okay, and so that's another, hey, you, for example, you really know a lot about this. Yeah. So then they start chatting about it. So no, I think though it's also an excuse not to hire somebody. Hey, you're just falling back into that stereotype again. You're old. You don't adapt. You don't learn something new. However, just to say on the other side is that I talked about plateauing before. Older worker falls into that plateauing, and they coast, or they just, this is all I need to know. And they get very defensive if they're told they have to change behavior and or change their knowledge of technology. What's wrong? I'm fine the way I am.
It's obvious there's lots of issues, and it's interactive, and it's very complicated, and we're experiencing greater numbers of people coming in and going out of the workforce, that are retiring, that want to be relevant, that want to come back and help and have purpose. Here's a Commonwealth Fund of New York for several years studied over 55 workers, and they researched them for several years, and they came up with these 3 words. The over 40, over 55 worker was undervalued, disregarded, and an untapped resource. So we're going to talk about several other issues and why this is and how we could overcome it.
And Ron, I just want to say that the women in the workforce, those 3 words could be used for them as well. Women in the workforce, and as well as racial, the race thing as well. Underappreciated, undervalued. Hence the reason why ageism should be part of diversity, just like the rest of them. All right, so I just wanted to get that in.
We'll appreciate that, and we're going to continue the conversation, Randy. Thanks again for the talk.
My pleasure. Till next time.